Hi, I'm Lorelei. I gave up a career, a city, and a life I built, just to be there for my father before he passed. But while I held his hand in a hospital bed, my brother-in-law was signing away my inheritance with his new woman on a so-called wellness trip. They didn't just cut me out of a will, they orchestrated it. My sister smiled while it happened. My mother stayed silent. They built a legacy off my father's name and erased mine. But what if I told you? I was never meant to find out. And yet I did. Charleston had its own kind of chill, the kind that didn't come from the breeze off the harbor. It came from inside rooms like my sister's dining area, polished silverware, lukewarm coffee, and too many forced smiles. We were seated for brunch that Sunday, me, Malis, her husband Gideon, and our mother Valora, when Gideon announced he was leaving for a wellness retreat. Malis didn't look surprised. She was buttering her toast so meticulously, you'd think it was a ritual. "It's a mindfulness resort," Gideon said, reaching for his phone mid-sentence. "Just upstate. No phones, no stress, just restoration." He didn't look up as he spoke. "And you're going alone?" I asked casually, tracing circles on the rim of my mug. "Of course," he replied with a smirk that never touched his eyes. "A man's gotta recenter. Grieving takes different forms, Lorelei." Grieving. He used that word like it was a business memo. Our father had passed 3 months ago, and Gideon had cried exactly once, and I suspected even that was for show. "You always were into alternative approaches," I said, biting the inside of my cheek. Miley set her knife down too loudly. "It's not your business how my husband copes, Lorelei." "Right. Of course. People cope by disappearing into the mountains with a suitcase that includes 2 tickets. Yes, I checked the itinerary later. What struck me most wasn't the announcement. It was the way Milas avoided my eyes. She was wearing a new silk blouse, pale rose. Probably from that shop on King Street she swore she didn't spend money at anymore. "People will show you who they are," my father used to say. "Just wait long enough." I was done waiting. Later that afternoon, I was in their home. Our mother had insisted I help with cleaning up after the brunch, something about family traditions. Maylise had left her iPad unlocked on the kitchen island. I'm not proud of snooping, but there it was. An email, subject line. "Deposit confirmed, Villa Escalante." The email thanked S. Dalton for the down payment. Sable Dalton. I didn't know her well, but I'd met her once. Gideon introduced her at a real estate gala 2 years ago as a sharp young investor. I clicked out of the screen and locked the device. Malis entered the room behind me, her heels silent on the wood floors. "Find what you needed?" she asked, voice flat. "I thought this trip was about your stress," I replied quietly. Her nostrils flared. "Again, Lorelei, it's not your business what helps my husband relax." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. 3 days later, I offered to drive Malis's car to the mechanic. Some nonsense about the front tire alignment. She tossed me the keys without a second glance. It was barely 9 a.m. when her phone, left in the cup holder, lit up. It rang twice and auto-answered to speaker mode. "Hey baby," a woman's voice cooed through the cabin. "So, when's the beach house gonna be in my name like you promised?" I pulled over, not because of traffic, but because my stomach had suddenly hollowed out. I didn't know whether to scream or throw up. My hands shook as I shut off the call. It wasn't heartbreak, it was humiliation. For my sister, for my father. For every Sunday morning, I sat across from this man and nodded like he deserved to breathe the same air as us. "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," Dr. King had said. And this wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, in suits and clean collars. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened the file box my father had left me. I'd never looked through it before. Part of me thought it would feel like prying. But now I needed facts. Dad always warned me, never trust a man who calls wellness an investment. It sounded cryptic back then. Now it read like prophecy. I flipped through folders, tax documents, old contracts, and then I found it. something labeled Asset Reallocation Plan. It had been finalized a week before Dad's death. I scanned the paper, page by page. At the signature line, there it was, Gideon's name, and beneath it, the transferee. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my father's either. I didn't sleep the night after opening those papers. Instead, I watched the sunrise from my apartment window, coffee in one hand, my father's file box in the other. The streets of Charleston moved slow on weekdays, almost like the city wanted to delay delivering more bad news. But I was done being surprised. I was ready to be informed. By 8, I was seated at my desk. No makeup, no distractions, just me and the grim determination that had taken over. I powered up the old family laptop I'd borrowed years ago to help Malis manage our mother's insurance. She never changed her passwords, never thought she had to. A few clicks later, I was in the shared email she once asked me to help organize. My fingers hovered before I opened the most recent thread from Gideon's law firm. The subject line read, Final Transfer Confirmation, Escalante Estate. The recipients were only 2 names, Gideon Wallace and Malis Wallace. Attached was a PDF, short, clinical, damning. A transfer of ownership, removing the beachfront lot from the Davenport Trust. Effective immediately. No mention of me, no mention of Dad's original wishes. I stared at it. Not blinking, not breathing. It was like stumbling upon a crime scene, but one where no one screamed, no one ran, and the blood had been scrubbed clean. All that remained were the signatures. Quiet, permanent, legal. Trust but verify, I whispered aloud, Reagan's words echoing through a haze of betrayal. Later that day, I stopped by Mom's house. I didn't tell her I was coming. I didn't want the conversation rehearsed. Milas was in the sunroom, her favorite tea already steeping. She greeted me with that composed smile of hers, the one that always felt just a little too symmetrical. Surprised to see you without a reason, she said, setting her cup down gently. Everything all right? I sat across from her and waited until she looked up. Did you know Dad's beach lot is no longer under the family trust? She blinked. Once. Then leaned back into the cushion like I'd asked about the weather. That's Gideon's department. I stay out of those things. There it was. Not denial, not confusion. Just detachment. Too polished, too controlled. Malis, I said slowly, that land was supposed to go to both of us. We talked about it. You said... I said a lot of things when Dad was sick, she interrupted, stirring her tea with unnecessary focus. Things change. You moved to New York, remember? I laughed once, short, dry. So that's the price of absence? Total erasure? She didn't answer, didn't need to. Back home, I went straight to work. I pulled up the notary database from Gideon's law firm. Most people wouldn't even think to look there, but I'd interned at a probate office during law school. Every legal file leaves a breadcrumb if you know where to dig. It was buried in the metadata. A transfer note that read, Final recipient, S. Dalton. I dropped the phone. Sable Dalton. The same Sable whose voice I'd heard purring through Malis's car. The woman now attached, legally, to what was once my family's most valued asset. That moment, it wasn't about money, or property, or even my father's legacy. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. The following evening, we gathered at Mom's for dinner. Gideon, Milas, and Valora. I stayed quiet through most of the meal, letting them lead the conversation. Gideon was unusually animated, discussing new investment strategies and expansion efforts. You know, there's a time in life when people just need to let go, he said, cutting into his steak. Milas gave a small, knowing smile. Mom refilled her wine glass and changed the subject before I could respond. They didn't know I'd printed the documents, that they were in a folder under the table, that every keystroke, every file transfer, had already been archived. Twice. And even if they had known, I doubt they'd have cared. When your own mother can't meet your eyes, you start to wonder when exactly the house you grew up in stopped being your home. The email from the notary was still open on my screen when I found myself staring out the window, lost in the dull ache that had begun pulsing behind my eyes. Rain tapped the glass, a gentle percussion to thoughts I didn't want to have. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the beginning. This erasure. They hadn't started it last week or even last month. They started years ago. I just hadn't seen it. Or maybe I refused to. 18 months ago, I was in New York City. The job offer I'd been chasing for almost a decade had just landed on my desk. Senior counsel at Wexler and Hartman. The managing partner pulled me aside that morning, handed me the envelope with a handshake and a wink, and said, "You're next in line, Lorelei. Don't mess it up." I didn't get to celebrate. That same afternoon, Valora called. "Your father's taken a turn," she said, voice clipped like she was giving a grocery list, not a life update. "If you want to say goodbye properly, you should come now." I left the job. I left my apartment. I packed my life into 4 suitcases and flew to Charleston without a return date. They say you measure love by what you give up. I wrote in my journal the night I resigned. I didn't know I was trading a life for a lie. No one asked me to come back. But no one stopped me either. That's the part that still gets me. The quietness of the betrayal. The way no one shouted, but doors just closed on their own. Dad didn't speak much in those last weeks. The cancer made him thin, then brittle, then someone I didn't recognize. But one night, near the end, he reached for my hand and whispered, "Don't ever let them reduce you to a witness." It sounded strange at the time. I thought maybe the medication made him poetic. But now, it felt like a warning I hadn't understood in time. After he died, I found a note tucked in the back of his leather journal, his blocky handwriting barely legible. "My youngest understands what legacy means." He left no video, no speech, just that line. That was his farewell. The funeral was tasteful, elegant, distant. Malis had hired a professional speaker for the eulogy, but decided to deliver a short message herself. "Gideon stood beside our father through the hardest months," she said, her voice rich with practiced grief. "He kept our family together." She didn't mention me. Not once. I sat 3 rows back, next to our mother. No one had asked if I wanted to speak, and I didn't offer. "You can cry in a church and still bury the wrong person," I wrote that night in my journal. I'd brought it with me in my purse, still torn between needing something to hold on to and needing something to write it all out of me. Back at home, hours after the last condolence text stopped coming, I spread out every document Dad had saved in his study. Legal folders, handwritten notes, property drafts. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe a pattern, maybe a loophole, but I found something more dangerous, perspective. "This wasn't about money," I whispered, watching my reflection in the glass frame that held a picture of us from 10 years ago. This was about being erased. That night, I started scanning everything into a folder on my laptop titled Legacy Restoration. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. They'd already decided I didn't belong, but I had something none of them expected. My father's handwriting and his faith in me. It was late afternoon when I pulled into the driveway at Valora's house. The azaleas in front had started to wilt, and the porch light was already flickering on, even though the sun hadn't fully set. I hadn't been invited, but I didn't need an invitation to walk into the home I used to help clean every Saturday growing up. The front door was slightly ajar, classic Malis, too consumed with control to care about locks. As I stepped inside, I heard voices drifting from the dining room. Not casual chatter. The tone was clipped, purposeful. "Then we'll allocate the remaining shares to the boutique partnership under Sable's name," Gideon said. I walked in without hesitation. At the end of the long dining table sat 3 people, Malis, Gideon, and Valora. They each had a folder open in front of them. There were only 3 chairs, not one for me. "Interesting this wasn't on the family calendar," I said, keeping my voice level. Valora didn't flinch. "We didn't think you'd want to be involved in the legal parts, sweetheart." There it was again. that manufactured tenderness she reserved for moments when she wanted to seem fair. Not actually be fair, just seem it. I didn't sit. I stood at the corner of the table, scanning the documents like a teacher about to scold a cheating student. "We're just working through some optimization," Gideon said, barely glancing up. "Housekeeping, really." I noticed the headers on the documents. G Holdings, not Davenport Trust, not family estate, not even joint assets, just Gideon's empire being built off my father's name, without his daughter in the picture. "If you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu," I murmured. Gideon raised an eyebrow. Mylese looked down, suddenly very interested in her notes. No one asked me to leave, but no one offered me a chair either. Later that evening, after they'd left to continue talks elsewhere, I lingered in the dining room. Something in me refused to leave empty-handed. I drifted into Melis's home office, formerly our childhood playroom, and glanced around. On the desk was a small stack of printed drafts. The top page caught my eye. Rev 3 Final, no signature needed. I skimmed it. My name was gone. Every tangible property had been reassigned to Melis or to Sable Dalton. My name, nowhere. No notes, no allocations, no consideration. Erasure isn't sudden, it's gradual, like rot behind fresh paint. I used to help Dad proofread documents. He'd give me a red pen and ask me to mark what didn't feel right. I did that for years, until the last 6 months, when he stopped asking. Or maybe he was told to stop. I walked downstairs, folder in hand. Valora was in the kitchen, swirling a glass of Chardonnay. "Do we have a final copy of the will?" I asked. She didn't turn around. "It's been handled." That's not what I asked. Still, she wouldn't meet my eyes. I took a breath. "As a daughter, I have the right to see what my father signed." She sipped her wine. "You'll have to speak to Gideon's office." And that was it. They think silence is peace, but I'm a storm that waits. When I stepped outside, the sky had darkened into a dense indigo, the kind of night that pressed on your skin, reminded you that nothing was as still as it seemed. I stood by my car, folder pressed against my chest, and stared back at that house, the one I used to run barefoot through, back when love didn't have conditions. They thought I wouldn't show up, that I'd go quietly, like a good daughter with no questions. If no one planned a seat for me, I'd build my own damn table. The documents were still spread across my dining table when I found it. The paper I had signed at the hospital, just days before Dad slipped into that final silence. I'd scribbled my name quickly, barely reading it, more focused on the beep of his monitor than the legal jargon in front of me. It was supposed to be temporary, just a simple authorization to move funds for his care. But now, sitting alone in my apartment, I reread every line with a lawyer's eye and a daughter's fury. The language was clever, intentionally vague, legally slippery. It granted limited but ongoing authority to manage and redirect estate resources as deemed necessary by appointed trustees. No expiration, no clause for reevaluation, nothing to protect me, nothing to keep Gideon's hands out of everything my father had built. I wasn't being helped. I was being replaced. I let out a sharp breath and whispered, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." And he had shown me, years ago. I remember the last family estate meeting I was invited to, 4 years back. We were sitting in the same room where my father used to host Sunday pancakes, now turned into Gideon's polished strategy suite. I had a binder full of legal options, highlighted, cross-referenced, color-coded. Gideon cut me off mid-sentence. "You're emotional, Lorelei. This isn't courtroom work." Melis nodded in quiet agreement, offering her signature smile that never quite touched her eyes. "We just need fewer cooks in the kitchen, sis." I left without finishing my thought, and they never asked me back. Back in the present, I stood and began gathering documents into organized stacks. Color tabs, digital scans, timestamps. I wasn't just mourning anymore. I was preparing. By morning, I had drafted a formal email, addressed to Melis, Gideon, and Valora. I requested a full audit of all estate assets, including property transfers, bank withdrawals, and investment reallocations made in the last 2 years. It was direct, professional, no fluff. The kind of message that makes people nervous without needing to shout. Maylise didn't respond. Gideon's office sent back a pre-written auto-reply. "Thank you for your inquiry. We are currently reviewing your request. Please allow up to 90 days for a formal response." Cowards. I created a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Evidence Restoration. I uploaded everything, cross-referenced every statement, built a timeline that told a story they were hoping no one would ever be able to tell. And then, I paid Valora a visit. She opened the door with her usual lukewarm expression, part hostess, part referee. I didn't waste time. "Where's Maylise?" I asked. "She's in the sunroom. Be kind, Lorelei." Kind. That word had been used against me like a leash for years. Today I came to cut it. I found Maylise sipping chamomile and reading through a magazine like there wasn't a war unfolding behind her back. "This is your last chance to tell me the truth before lawyers read it first," I said, voice calm but heavy. She looked up, unbothered. "If you go that route, you'll break this family." I stepped closer. "You already did. I'm just the one admitting it." For a moment, her expression changed, like she saw the version of me she never wanted to believe existed. The one who didn't beg. The one who knew where every paper trail ended and wasn't afraid to drag it into the light. She said nothing else. I turned and walked out, but not before glancing back at her once. Just long enough to let her know, whatever came next, I wasn't stopping. They didn't respond to my message, so I sent one they couldn't ignore. I didn't go straight home after leaving Valora's house. Instead, I drove across the bridge, my fingers gripping the wheel tighter than necessary as I made my way to North Charleston. Tucked away in a nondescript storage unit was something I hadn't touched in months. My father's desk. It had been his command post. Sturdy oak, carved with initials from a time before digital signatures, before betrayal was spelled out in PDFs. I moved it here the week after the funeral, not because I needed it, but because I couldn't bear to see Gideon sitting behind it like he owned the legacy, like he earned it. Now I stood in front of the desk again, staring at the small, rust-colored safe built into the side drawer. I ran my hand across the dial. "The combination's not numbers," my father once told me. "It's a date that never fails you." I tried their anniversary. Nothing. Then I entered Mom's birthday. Click. The safe popped open with a tired creak. Inside was a sealed manila folder, a leather-bound notebook, and a thin envelope marked with my initials in Dad's handwriting. The first thing I opened was the folder. I didn't even sit down. Just stood there flipping through page after page until I found it. The original will. My name was there. Bold, clear, co-trustee, equal owner. The next item was a handwritten letter. Short, direct. "This house was never built for silence. Speak if they won't. Dad." I pressed the paper to my chest and exhaled through gritted teeth. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't spiraling. I was right. Truth is like the sun. You can shut it out for a time, but it ain't going away. The next morning, I sat in my living room with the safe contents spread across the floor. My laptop blinked awake as I began organizing everything: scans, timestamps, metadata. One side-by-side document showed the finalized, will Gideon submitted, versus the original version from the safe. Different formatting, different witness signatures, and most importantly, different beneficiaries. It was around noon when I took a break, grabbing my phone and idly scrolling through Instagram. That's when I saw her. Sable. Her profile was still public, still curated like a lifestyle brand. She had just posted a memory from 5 years ago. A brunch photo, cropped with intention, captioned, "Thank you, G. Couldn't have done this without you. Legacy starts here." I zoomed in on the background. It was our beach lot, the one I grew up running barefoot on. The gate was visible. The ironwork my dad had commissioned with our initials. DT. There are betrayals. Then there are orchestrations. Sable hadn't just shown up in Gideon's life by coincidence. I had introduced them. At a real estate fundraiser. I had thought she was just another smart, driven woman trying to build a name in a tough industry. Turns out, she was trying to build a name using mine. I stared at the screen until it dimmed itself. Then, I opened a new digital folder titled Phase 2. Back at my desk, I recorded an audio note for myself. You're not paranoid when you're finally proven right. I clicked through old emails, found the date logs matching the forged documents, cross-referenced Gideon's firm's filings. It was all there. Not hidden, just buried in the places people assume no one looks. That night, I revisited Sable's profile again, this time scrolling deeper, through birthdays, client wins, weekend getaways. She wore sunglasses in most of the shots, but not in one. A group picture, long since forgotten, taken at the edge of a fundraiser brunch. I was in the background, smiling, next to her. The caption read, "Future's bright and full of surprises. The saddest thing about betrayal is that it never comes from enemies." I shut the laptop and stood, letting the weight of the realization settle. I wasn't their victim anymore. I was their witness, and soon their reckoning. The rain had stopped by the time I left the storage unit, but the streets still shimmered with leftover storm. I drove home in silence, windshield wipers ticking just enough to break the hush in my mind. By the time I unlocked my door, I wasn't angry. I was calculating. I laid the original will on my coffee table next to the forged one I'd scanned from the law office. I'd gone through both line by line, cross-referenced dates, witnesses, formatting. One was clean, one was a fraud. I didn't have a smoking gun, not yet. But I had a trail. It came from an unlikely source. A former paralegal who used to work at Gideon's firm messaged me late that night. "You didn't hear this from me," she wrote. "But the office had CCTV during all notarized meetings. Check the recording dated April 11th. The signature log doesn't match the entry time." I replied with a simple, "Thank you." By morning, I had the footage. It showed Gideon walking into a conference room, papers under his arm. No witnesses, no notary, no one else in the building. The timestamp was 3 weeks after my father's death. The screen flickered as he sat down, flipped the pages, and signed, with calm confidence. I watched it twice, then a third time. He even straightened the corners before leaving. "You can't outshout a signature," I whispered, uploading the video into a private cloud folder. "But you can outproof one." Later that afternoon, I logged into the joint savings account Milas and I had opened back when we were still close. It had been dormant for years, but I'd left it untouched, believing it might come in handy for emergency family expenses. I had hoped to use it now, for legal fees, but the balance read $1,427. The transaction history told me the rest. Withdrawals over the last year, labeled as investment consolidations and consulting retainer. The addresses matched hotels in Florida, a home decor store in Savannah, and a retreat center in Sedona. Gideon. I wasn't robbed. I was looted. By someone who smiled while doing it. That evening, I created an LLC, Lorelei Davenport Holdings, not out of vanity, out of necessity. If they wanted this to be a war waged with polished documents and polite phrases, I would meet them there, on paper, in strategy, with everything they didn't see coming. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Paula, who once uncovered fraud in a city council scandal. Sharp eyes, no hesitation. I sent her everything. Then I reached out to a litigation firm 2 towns over, one not connected to any of Gideon's contacts. I laid it all out, wills, transfers, footage, and a clear pattern of financial deception. The associate on the call didn't blink. "You're sitting on a time bomb," she said, "and you've done 90% of the detonation work yourself." "If they treat you like a threat," I replied, "be one." I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, I sent a formal email to Gideon, Milas, and Valora. The subject line was direct, request for full transparency of estate records. I gave them 7 business days. 7. Within 4 hours, Gideon replied. With his lawyer CC'd, "We consider this harassment. Please direct all future inquiries through counsel." Milas didn't say a word. Valora forwarded the message to me with a note. "I hope you know what you're doing." I do, I thought. Finally. I clicked open my cloud storage, rewatched the footage, double-checked the letterhead, made copies of everything. They wrote the rules. I'm playing with the receipts. The footage was queued, the papers were scanned, and their party was about to begin. It started with a post, a glossy photo on Sable's Instagram, time-stamped just after midnight, geotagged at Legacy Wellness Estates. She stood in front of the old beach house my father built, one hand on her hip, the other wrapped around a champagne flute, smiling like she owned every brick behind her. In the caption, "Launching something beautiful tomorrow. Legacy redefined." I stared at the screen, breath held, jaw locked. Legacy redefined? She had no legacy. She had a borrowed house, a borrowed man, and a future built on stolen paper. I packed my documents in a leather case, slipped my camera into the inner lining, charged the mic, checked my files 3 times. I didn't need an invitation. The truth didn't ask for permission. By noon, the sun was high, the parking lot of the resort packed with expensive cars and designer suits. Gideon spared no expense. A white tent billowed in the breeze behind the house, a live band tuning up on the lawn. Servers weaved through clusters of guests with hors d'oeuvres that looked like they cost more than my rent. I walked in like I belonged there, because I did. Sable was taking photos near the main entrance. She wore all white, an ironic choice. A videographer hovered nearby, adjusting her angle. I watched her laugh at something Gideon whispered in her ear. His hand rested on her back, like she'd always been part of this family. I kept walking. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a gallery of mindful living. Photos of the renovation process lined the walls, each caption written in Gideon's rehearsed marketing voice. This space was created to heal. Here, wellness meets purpose. I stood at the back as the crowd gathered near the stage. Gideon took the mic. "Thank you all for being here today. Legacy Wellness is more than a project, it's a promise, and none of this would be possible without the vision of someone who saw the potential in this place when no one else did." He gestured toward Sable. The room applauded. Sable gave a soft wave, basking in it. That was my cue. I stepped forward, out of the shadows. "Before we rewrite history," I said, my voice slicing through the applause, "let's add a few footnotes." Heads turned. A few murmurs. Someone near the front held up a phone to record. Gideon blinked. "Lorelei, this isn't—" "No," I interrupted. "It isn't. And it never was." I opened the leather case and pulled out the original will. This is my father's last will and testament, dated, notarized, and filed before any of this was even imagined. Then I turned toward the projector. "Let's play something else." The screen behind them flickered. A few seconds later, the video began. Gideon alone in the law office, signing documents with no witnesses present. The room fell silent. You could hear the clink of a wine glass hitting the floor. The video ended. I said nothing. The press surged forward. Microphones, flashes, chaos. Malis stood frozen beside the stage. Sable's smile disappeared like smoke. Gideon tried to speak, but choked on the sudden dryness of his throat. I turned toward the crowd. "You don't destroy legacies," I said, calm and clear. "You just delay the ones who built them from claiming them back." Then I stepped off the platform, handed a printed copy of the will to the event coordinator, and walked out into the sunlight. Outside, the crowd buzzed louder. But inside me, there was only stillness. The truth went viral, but so did their silence. The morning after the party was quieter than I expected. I woke to no angry voicemails, no half-hearted apologies, not even an email from Valora asking me to explain myself. Just stillness. And then the vibration of my phone. Sable had posted a new photo. She stood on the balcony of the beachfront house, barefoot and radiant, the same house built by my father's hands. She wore one of Melis's scarves like a crown. In the caption, "Forever grateful for what we've built. Legacy Queen." There's a special kind of venom in someone thanking the world for stealing your father's bones. I didn't comment, didn't share. I just stared. Let the heat build beneath my skin until the numbness cracked open. I tried texting Melis. Message failed. I tried calling Valora. Straight to voicemail, no return. I emailed Gideon's office, firm but restrained. 2 hours later, I got a reply. Cease and desist. Your continued interference constitutes defamation and harassment. I read it twice, then deleted it. Not out of defeat, out of clarity. It's not the loud lies that hurt most. It's the quiet door slams. That afternoon, I sat in my living room with a cup of lukewarm tea and opened the voice memo app on my phone. I hit record. My name is Lorelei Davenport, I said, voice steadier than I felt. And this is what happened. I told it all, start to finish. Not for a courtroom, not for revenge, but in case the story ever needed telling again. For the next daughter they tried to rewrite, for the woman who wouldn't get a chance to prove she was there all along. Each night that week, I recorded a new entry. I titled the folder Just In Case, and then I backed it up twice. One evening, just before sunset, I drove out to my father's old studio. It hadn't been used since he passed, dust covering the windows, the smell of cedar and old paint still hanging in the air. I unlocked the door and stood for a moment in the threshold, unsure why I'd come. Then I saw it. Tucked under the desk, folded and taped to the underside, was a sticky note. Nearly faded, curling at the edges. If she finds this, she's the one. That was it. 8 words, no context. But they were enough. He knew. He always knew. And he left that message not for Melis, not for Gideon. For me. I sat on the floor, the note in my lap, and let the silence press in from every direction. Not crushing this time. Clarifying. I didn't need their table. I didn't even need their response. I had my story, my voice, my truth. They shut every door, so I walked into the one they forgot to lock. It started with a coincidence. Or maybe it wasn't. A week after the video of Gideon's signature went public, I was at a legal outreach event downtown, mostly to stay visible. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was a presence now. A face people recognized. A name they whispered with curiosity or respect, depending on which side they stood. I was handing out pamphlets when I saw him. Mr. Barrett, my father's old estate lawyer. He was older, thinner, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, calculated. And when they met mine, something in them softened. I always wondered when you'd come asking, he said, stepping out of the line for coffee. We sat on a bench near the courthouse, the kind with chipped paint and too much bird droppings. He didn't waste time. Reached into his worn briefcase and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, yellowed at the edges. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. In case it ever gets ugly, Barrett said. Your dad asked me to hold on to this, and it's gotten ugly. I opened it in the car. Inside was a notarized copy of the original will, same as the one from the safe, but this one came with a second sheet, a transcript, typed beneath a clean header, Personal Statement of Intent, Donald E. Davenport. I hit play on the attached USB. My daughter Lorelei, my father's voice crackled through the car speakers, stood by me when no one else did. She didn't ask for credit. She didn't need applause, but she earned this. And if anyone tries to rewrite that, you better believe I put her name down, twice. I pulled over. He didn't leave me out. He left a trail for when they tried to. That night, I didn't sleep. I crafted a private press release, attached the will, the transcript, the notarized copy, the voice file, uploaded it all to a public Dropbox link labeled Davenport Legacy Verified. I sent it to 3 people, a journalist from the Charleston Tribune who had covered the estate opening, a podcast host who spotlighted local corruption cases, and an online investigative site known for taking down predatory developers. By noon, it was everywhere. Daughter fights to restore stolen legacy and might just win, the headline read. Underneath was a photo of me from the launch party, file in one hand, finger pointed toward the projector. Behind me, the frozen image of Gideon mid-signature. My phone didn't stop buzzing for 2 days. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Clients, law professors, former colleagues from New York. One message stuck with me. When you have truth, you don't need a crowd. You just need one microphone. Then came the twist no one expected. The journalist added a video edit to the story. The full footage of me interrupting Gideon's speech. The will in my hand. The audience frozen in disbelief. It played across every platform. News, Reddit, Facebook, and the comments. She stood alone, but never again. She didn't raise her voice. She raised her proof. I don't know her, but I believe her. I watched the clip once, then closed the tab. I wasn't doing this for clicks or pity. I didn't need anyone to validate what I already knew. But the silence that had followed me for months had finally been replaced. Not by noise, but by confirmation. They built their empire on deception, and now I was the audit they didn't plan for. The headlines changed their story, but my next step would rewrite mine. The message came just before sunrise. A single word. Coffee? It was from Valora. I stared at it for longer than I should have. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. That was her way. One word. Always vague. Always just enough to seem like a gesture without making an actual one. I replied, same place? 5 minutes later, yes. We met at a little church cafe downtown, one of those cozy places that smelled like cinnamon and quiet regret. I got there first, ordered black coffee, and chose the booth facing the window. She walked in wearing a navy cardigan, hair pinned neatly like she hadn't aged a day since Dad's funeral. She sat without a word, stirred her coffee too long, then finally said, I knew. That was all it took. The air changed. I didn't ask what she meant. She clarified anyway. I knew the will had been altered. Not all the details, but I knew. I didn't respond. I let them handle it, she continued, voice shaking slightly. I was tired. They said you wouldn't want to be involved, that it would create conflict. And honestly, she looked at me, really looked at me. I didn't think you'd fight back. You didn't hand it over, I said softly. You handed me away. She closed her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. It didn't fix anything, but I didn't expect it to. We finished our coffee in near silence, the kind that didn't ache anymore, just hung in the air like a scar you stopped noticing. On the way home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove along the coastline until I found myself at the beach house. Mine now, legally restored, quietly reclaimed. No banner, no ribbon cutting. I walked barefoot down to the sand and placed a small bronze plaque in the corner of the porch. It bore 3 initials, DED. I didn't post it, didn't text a photo to anyone, didn't call. Some victories don't need an audience. I sat there a while, listening to the waves, remembering the mornings Dad would bring coffee down to the shore, claiming the ocean was louder at 6 a.m. Because it hasn't learned to lie yet, he'd joke. Before leaving, I locked up the house and slipped the deed into a fireproof case. At home, I cleared out old voicemails from Milas, unplayed, deleted a dozen emails from Gideon's lawyers, unread. Then I changed my number. I archived everything from the case into a private drive labeled No Access, moved the files from my father into a sealed box, labeled in bold red, Do Not Bury Twice. You don't owe conversations to people who only spoke when they needed your silence, I said out loud, just to hear it. It was evening when I finally sat at my kitchen table and stared at the last unopened envelope, one Malis had left in my mailbox a week earlier. I opened it. Inside was a card, blank except for one line. You got what you wanted. No signature, no return address. I didn't answer it. They thought I needed them to be whole, but all I ever needed was my own voice and a way forward. I found it by accident. Late one night, sorting through the last of Dad's things, I noticed the old guitar he used to play when the power went out, the one with the chipped fretboard and duct-taped case. It had been silent for years, just decoration now, but something about it pulled me. I flipped it over. The back panel didn't sit flush. It popped open with a little pressure, and there it was, a slim USB drive taped to the inside. My breath caught. I plugged it into my laptop with hands I didn't realize were shaking. There was only one file. Legacy Audio Final. I clicked play. If they're listening, it means I didn't make it. Dad's voice came through, steady, calm, as if he were just leaving a voicemail. Let it be known, the land, the legacy, the family name. It belongs to Lorelei. She's the one who stood when others waited. The one who stayed. It wasn't just legal. It was spiritual. And it was mine. 2 days later, I walked into the Charleston courthouse with the envelope Barrett had given me, the voice file from the guitar, the original will from the safe, and the video of Gideon's forged signing on a flash drive labeled Truth. The clerk glanced at the contents, then at me. "Ma'am," she said, raising an eyebrow, "with this, you don't need a lawyer. You need a bank vault." She wasn't wrong. Within 48 hours, the estate was formally re-registered in my name. All holdings reassigned, control restored. Not as Lorelei, daughter of the deceased, but as Lorelei Davenport, executor. I went home, sat on the floor with the final paperwork in my lap, and for the first time in months, felt still. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I drafted a letter. Clean, direct, impossible to misinterpret. To Gideon Wallace, Malis Wallace. From Lorelei Davenport, subject. Termination of access and holdings. I listed the holdings they would be removed from. Not requested, removed. I included the eviction date for the beach property, a cease and desist for use of our family name in any branding materials. I even had it notarized, just for good measure. I sent it certified, tracked it every step of the way, watched the signature receipt hit my inbox. There was no reply, just silence, but not the kind that haunted me anymore, the kind that confirmed what I already knew. 2 days later, Gideon's firm announced the sudden resignation of one of his partners. Good. Sometimes the biggest act of revenge is the act of removing your presence entirely. And then, finally, there was the house. I stood in front of the beachfront property as the last contractor packed up the newly painted signage. White letters against navy wood. The Davenport Trust Center for Women in Law. It wasn't just a name, it was a promise. We hosted a small opening ceremony. No family, just local leaders, 3 law students from the state university, and a handful of women I'd mentored. The speeches were short. The plaque was unveiled. Someone brought flowers. I didn't cry, I didn't toast. I just stood under the sunlight and watched something begin. I built something they could never touch, I whispered to myself, because they never believed in building anything but control. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of tea and let the waves fill the silence. The wind carried no ghosts, only salt. I had no plans to call Malis, none to write Valora, none to revisit the ruins they left behind. They made their choices, and I made mine. They buried me in lies. I came back with legacy. And now, the only name anyone remembers was the one they tried to erase.